Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to Richard Skipper Celebrates. I don't know about any of you, but it feels like it's 2022 already. My God, what the last 19, how many days has it been? It feels like everything is happening. Every hour on the hour, everything changes. But for the next hour, I want you all to forget about what's going on out there, or at least try to. And let's just all come together and let's celebrate this incredible artist that I have on the show tonight, Jeff Ganz. He truly is a man of many musical hats. My show is all about celebrating artists and their body of worth. What makes a great artist? There are many things that I have been reading about with Jeff that I cannot wait to delve into tonight. He was born in Washington, D.C., but when he was a young child, they moved to New York, so he considers himself a New Yorker. We'll talk about that. And he started out as a guitarist, vocalist, very much in the style of Hendrix and Clapton, but then he mastered the bass. Well, don't take my word for it. Check him out for yourself. I'll see you back in a few minutes. Jeff, to you.
Oh my God, I sounded like one guy.
It's all about that bass.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was can I tell you a little bit about that?
Absolutely, please
It was
do.
White Summer that was written by Jimmy Page, who put together Led Zeppelin. And this was written during his days when he was with the Yardbirds, which was right before Led Zeppelin. And when I was 15, my friend Dean Silverstein and I went to see Led Zeppelin in Central Park, where the tickets were, the good seats were $1.50 and the lousy seats were $1. So we had the good seats, and Jimmy Page played that solo. Actually, not completely solo, because John Bonham, the drummer, accompanied him on like mallets. And it was just such a meaningful moment to me in my life and stayed with me forever.
Obviously. And how long?
I just wanted to pay homage to it. The bass is actually a piccolo bass, which means that it's an octave above standard tuning of the bass. So it's in the guitar range.
And how long did it take you to master that?
Let me see. You know what? As a performer yourself, do you know how some things are just in your DNA and you just want to, even though you never sang it, you know it and you sang it? You know, it was kind of like that. It's just been in my life for so long that it didn't take that much time to really pull it together, you know, just based on all of my long-term memories of it. You know?
Now, before we really get into your DNA and cover your career, I want to talk about where we are right now. As of this moment, today marks 311 days since Broadway has been shut down. And of course, that includes work all over the country, all over the world, essentially. Some cruise ships are starting to get back in the game again. But I want to ask you, before we really delve into your life and your work that you've done, how are you doing really right now?
Well, the new I'm doing great is I'm still here.
Knock on wood for all of us. Yes,
exactly. But I've been able to do a lot of what I do online, fortunately. Mm-hmm. You know, like so many others that are, you know, I'm doing bass tracks for people that need bass for their songs. I'm doing production. I'm doing co-writing. I'm doing mastering of people's catalog. So, you know, I'm still here and just trying to tap into whatever skill sets I have and just trying to up my game, you know?
Well, I want to ask you, I mean, as I mentioned, the theaters shut down 311 days ago. What did your calendar look like prior to March 11th of last year?
I was touring, as a matter of fact. I was in a band called the Hitmen, and we were touring the country. And what happened on March 11 is, actually it was March 12. We had just gotten done with a couple of dates. One was in, the last one was in Brooklyn, and the day before we were in Fort Lauderdale. So then the next week, you know, we had heard about this thing. And even though the thing we did was well attended, the following week we were on our way to Texas. And I guess it was, you know what, maybe it was like March 13 or March 14. I'm on my way to Jacksonville Airport. I live in St. Augustine, Florida. And the band leader calls, says, don't bother, turn around, go home. They've closed the town. And that was the beginning of just it happening everywhere else. And so from that point on, I've basically been home.
And approximately how many contracts did you have, you know, or was everything with the Hitmen?
Most of it was with the Hitmen. All of my local stuff stopped as well. You know, I have a steady, I was doing a steady Monday with a fellow named Rick Levy, who has actually tours with the Box Tops, gave me a ticket for, you know, those Box Tops. So we have a Sunday in St. Augustine. It was a 5 to 8 thing that was very well attended by people of our vintage and older. And that stopped as well because all the venues closed down.
Now, obviously, when this happened, none of us knew what was ahead. But for you, standing on that precipice at that moment, did you feel that everything was just completely over for the time being? Or did you see some glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel? Or did you think that this would be a temporary thing that would pass over?
I think it's, I always took the optimistic tack with it, that everybody banding together and doing what we had to do in every way, whether it's medically or anything else, it's spiritually, that it will, you know, blow over. Unfortunately, I know 21 people personally that have passed from it.
Me too. I've known a lot of friends, 15 for me.
Yeah.
It's, and God bless them all. They're smiling down on us, I hope. But I want to ask you, at that moment again, when all this was happening, how soon did you start getting the calls from a lot of people? Because a lot of people felt incapacitated, and they felt like, I don't know how to move forward. And then little by little, people started embracing this medium of being able to do things virtually. So how soon after that was that happening for you?
It was happening concurrently, because a lot of technology, being what it is, has replaced the need for the large recording studio. The New York freelance scene was already compromised by technology and machines and everything else that goes with it, that also permeated Broadway and live gigs as well as recordings. I mean, large orchestras and large recording studios on jingle dates and records were just not happening because the music has changed.
And
it already had been.
And how soon after you started getting the work did things really start to pick up for you with a momentum?
It's still hit and miss. I mean, it's hard to predict exactly when the next thing is going to happen, but I do have steady folks that I work with, but because of their own constraints, they're not as prolific as they were before.
Now, I want to go back to the 5-year-old Jeff Ganz. For me, the 5-year-old self is that beginning of time before you're encumbered with what school puts on us, peer pressure, all of that. I know that you were living in Washington, D.C., still at 5 years old. Can you tell me a little bit about your home life, your parents, brothers, sisters? Just give me the full gamut.
Absolutely. At 5 years old, I was actually living in Bethesda, Maryland. I was born in D.C., but then we moved to Bethesda probably when I was 4. My dad was working for the federal government. He was in the Manpower Career Development Division for many, many years, up until, they moved there in 47. They're New Yorkers as well. I was born in 53. And I have an older brother who's the bum of the family. He's a neurosurgeon.
Wow, God bless him.
And my brother Ed is still alive and well. As a matter of fact, he's still working, even though he's 12 years older than me. He tours, he's a consultant at medical schools in Portugal. So up until COVID, he was in Portugal 4 times a year. And my mom was a substitute teacher. Unfortunately, I had her as a substitute teacher in my elementary school. That was pretty surreal, I must tell you. But musically, the bullet bit probably right around that time when I realized I could keep a beat on my cross the street neighbor's drums. Then I took piano lessons, which I didn't have the tenacity to really do correctly. As a matter of fact, I was a sly little guy. I used to tape record myself practicing and play it so my mother would still think that I was practicing. And then clarinet. I inherited my older brother's clarinet and was in, school orchestras and stuff like that. And then around, where do you want me to stop here? You want to?
No, keep going. I love this.
Okay.
Well, did anyone else in your family have this musical genius bug that you have?
It turns out that I had a great uncle that was a cantor that I didn't know. So I didn't have musical parents. I didn't have musical grandparents, although my grandfather on my father's side always sang Pony Boy to me, Pony boy, said, and he sang in tune. So maybe it was from him.
Now, I may be giving away our age a little bit here, but you just told us what year you were born. But did you have a hi-fi in your home, and where was it, and what kind of music were you listening to?
We definitely did. As a matter of fact, I have this little thing I've been doing on Facebook, is posting pictures of all of people's old, including my old hi-fi stuff. Stock pictures from catalogs and stuff, but we absolutely did. And the first initiative I had to listen to music on my own, so many other people our age are talking about the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, but for me, it was more like MOR. Before that, there was a guy on WMAL, which was the ABC affiliate, named Felix Grant, and he used to have the album sound, it was called. So that's where you would hear Peggy Lee and Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass and people like that. And I used to listen to it. I was a devotee of that's what I had. That's what was on the transistor radio that was under my pillow, not rock radio.
And with all the instruments that you picked up, was there any instrument that was difficult for you, or did it all come naturally?
The ones that I tried, I mean, I was never really good. Well, like the clarinet, for instance. The first day of 7th grade band, we all sat down in the sections, and I was so great that I sat down the first day in 3rd chair of the first clarinets and worked my way all the way back to last chair of the 3rd clarinet. So that's how great I was at that, you know. But stringed instruments, guitar started when I was 13. We had just moved to New York by then. My dad had started a new job with New York City. He was a commissioner in Manpower. As a matter of fact, the phone rang when we were still in DC. Hello, yeah, is Sam Ganz there? Who's this? John Lindsay, who's the mayor at the time.
Yes,
and that's who hired my dad. And so we moved, and school started before I was, before they had a place to live, and before I had a place to live. They're living with my grandmother in Brooklyn, my mom's mom. And I started playing guitar while being in the 8th grade at school. I lived at school for those 2 years. Riverdale Country School had a dorm at that time, and that's where I went from 8th grade until through junior year. Wow. Through 11th grade.
I'm going to assume that your parents encouraged you in pursuing your musical pursuits.
Well, they didn't discourage me, especially when they found out it was going to be, something that was pretty serious. And of course, it didn't hurt when I started playing with people that they heard of.
Well, of course. This may fall into the what if category, but it is going to fall into the what if category. What if your family had not moved to New York? Do you think you still would have pursued this as a vocation, or did those opportunities open up as a result of your family moving to New York?
Yes, yes, and yes. I mean, because of New York being what it was, there were infinitely more opportunities, even though I could do a couple of things musically in Bethesda, Maryland. I don't think it would have happened any differently. The timeline is the timeline, and it's hard to second guess what would have actually happened. And
I want to ask you, how much of your career has been proactive, meaning that you pursued it, and how much of it is because of the people you've met along the way and the circumstances that you found yourself in?
You know what? I've never gotten any gig I've ever chased, and I've never chased any other gig I've gotten. So the less I tried, no, it's weird. I mean, the more I tried to get a gig, the less I would get the gig. Even when it came down to like auditions and things like that, I was always, as far as I got, I never got the job. And that was something that I did chase. But then I would get these calls, or they would just be happenstance. They're all very different about how I got the jobs, and all very unrelated, circumstances to how I got them.
And what was your first job? That you got paid for?
First job I got paid for, other than the school dances? First professional job. I went to my cousin Meryl's wedding at Oakland Jewish Center in Bayside in 1973, and I sat in with the wedding band. I went home, I got my guitar. We didn't live far away. We lived in Flushing at the time. I went back, got my guitar, got my amp, and the keyboard player in the band, who turned out to be my very, very first mentor, a fellow named Bob Weiner, who's still playing to this day, by the way. Lives down in Boca Raton, Florida, not, about 5 hours south of where we are, said, try this kid out. He's got something. So from that point on, I started being the rock guy at weddings, the proud Mary evil ways guy. Mm-hmm. Because that's what the extent of rock was in those, for those kinds of jobs, the wedding bands. And then they said, as I started doing that more and more, they said, look, you got to double on bass, and you're only going to play guitar when you sing these rock songs. I said, bass? Nah, I'm a rock and roll star. Leave me alone. Then I picked up the bass and had the epiphany of, wait a minute, I'm playing the wrong instrument my entire life. And that's when bass started at like 20.
Now, did you have any other survival jobs, or have you relied solely on your music?
No. Well, at that time, when I was first starting, I was a short order cook at the Queens College Student Union cafeteria. And then after that, I was a file clerk for the Social Security Administration.
Now, one thing that stood out for me when I was reading your bio was the fact that you made your mind up very early on that you were going to be the go-to person. Regardless of what they needed, you were going to be ready to do what they needed and to fill that niche. When, where, and how did that all come about for you?
It came about, I would probably say that I got real serious about that aspect of it after being in the Catskill Mountains. I was on the Local 802, the Musicians Union, used to have an exchange floor where contractors that would hire you and all the musicians would congregate. And so a fellow named Julie Schwartz, a saxophone player, introduced me to a fellow named Joe Merman, who was the band leader at a hotel called the Brickmans. And as a matter of fact, do you remember Carmel Quinn and Francis Langford? Remember these names?
Oh, yeah, of course, yes.
Joe Merman was their conductor back in the day. And he was the band leader. And he also ran sort of like a school to learn how to read and to learn how to play shows, sight read music without taking it home and painstakingly rehearse, which sort of, and that's really where I cut my teeth and learned how to read, other than with private teachers. I mean, the private teachers were great, but this was like the battlefield of do it now, or, we'll scoop up your remains later.
Now,
so it was at that point. I'm sorry. It was at that point that I liked so many different kinds of music. I just wanted to play all kinds of music. I didn't want to.
Well, that's myself. Question. When I first started out in this business, I was told by my dear friend KT Sullivan. You may have even worked with her.
I'm a fan.
Huge fan of KT's, but KT told me very early on, have at least 5 people who know your show, so you're never at a loss. And over the years, when I did my own live show, Richard Skipper Celebrates, yes. I had different guest performers in the show. And the first guest performer that I would book for each show, this was my secret, everyone, I would say, who do you like to work with? And I would reach out to that person. Sometimes I had worked with them. Sometimes I had not.
Are you talking about accompanists?
As a musical director, accompanist, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Now, I discovered with some people that they were not able to cross over to different styles because my shows were more of a variety show. Some performers ended up getting the short end of this lollipop because the musical director was not able to accompany them in the way that they needed to be accompanied. What is your secret that you're able to cross so many different genres?
Well, first of all, before I answer that, I'd love to work with you someday because I love what you do. Yep. And I love your approach to everything you've ever done, and everything you've gotten your hands in is, very inspiring to me. Just because what you have are giving people a platform to do is what you've done. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So kudos to you, and I'm very proud to be amongst the people that you've had on this show. So that being said, it sort of gets back to what we first started talking about with White Summer, right? So much of this stuff is in my DNA. My parents took me to see The Music Man when I was 8. My father took me to see Annie Get Your Gun with Ginger Rogers at Carter Barron. My father drove me to the Fillmore East so I could see Jimi Hendrix. You know what I mean? So there was all of these things that, to me, notes are notes are notes, and they're all sort of assembled in different ways with different feels. But one thing is really not that different from something else, that if you're open to it, you can probably play it really well and with conviction and authority. You just put yourself in that situation of what is this artist's intent.
Well, I was, as you know, I was dear friends with Carol Channing. Her husband, Harry Collegian, used to say, unless kids are exposed to it, they won't know the difference between a xylophone and a microphone.
Right.
They need to be exposed to it. And again, you and I came along at a time where when you turn on the radio and you change the channels, you got a little bit of everything. Now, I have a theory, which you may or may not agree with, and I'd love to get your take on this. But I believe that the biggest disservice, and forgive me, everyone, for what I'm about to say, the biggest disservice to the music industry was MTV. And I say this because MTV only played to a specific demographic. And entire generations have grown up since MTV came on the scene that have never been exposed to all this other kinds of music that's out there. The fact that you do all these, do you ever go out as, our friend dear Joey Lober, the Broadway Mentors program?
Of which I'm proud to be one. Love Joy to pieces, by the way.
I love her to pieces. But have you ever mentored kids in music as well?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I have. I've had private students. And as a matter of fact, one of my students, when we lived in New Jersey, went on to be a classical section leader in orchestras. But what I would do, I would write out like Crazy Train by Ozzy in bass tablature, and he'd look at it and he'd start laughing because I was just trying to be in his zone. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's the same thing between playing a Dragonetti concerto and playing some muscular fusion thing. It's the same notes. It's just an affinity to me, what the what the kind of music is, and just to be in that music. But to answer another thing I think you were implying is, back when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, so was Mitzi McCall and Marty Brill that night. In other words, it was family television.
Do you know who else was on the show that night? I'll share a funny story with you if you'd like to hear it.
Absolutely.
Mitzi Gaynor was on the show that night. And Mitzi Gaynor said that when her agent called and said, "You're going to be on the Ed Sullivan show," and she said, "Who else is on the show?" He said, "The Beatles." And she said, "Thank God nobody knows who they are." Because they had not hit American shores yet. So she said she was sitting in her dressing room, and all of a sudden she hears this roar, and she thought that a bomb had gone off. And she comes running out of the hall, and it's these teenage girls in the audience screaming at the Beatles. And she says, "To this day, nobody knows I was on that show."
And it's interesting. I actually sat next to her on a flight to South Africa once.
She's a dear friend. I love her dearly.
Very cool. But getting back to your other point of MTV, that might have been the beginning of disenfranchisement. You know what I mean? That it was so specifically targeted. Like you said, it's not the same thing as seeing the Dave Clark 5 on the Ed Sullivan Show and Topo Gigio. You know what I mean? And everybody was sitting around watching that. You know what I mean? So, but
any of these names, if you don't know who they are, everyone who's listening or watching, look them up.
Well,
they were very much a part of our lives.
Well, I am 67, and they say 67 is the new 66.
Well, I'm just a few years behind you. I'm catching up.
Yeah, but you're way better preserved.
No, you're looking pretty good yourself. The lighting is good wherever you are.
Well,
are you saying, Augustine?
Does this microphone windscreen make me look fat? Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
So I want to talk a little bit, again, since we bring up Joy, and you have also mentored kids. And I know some of the names, but from your own perspective, let's talk about some of the people who really have made an amazing influence on your life.
Oh my God, there's so many. Chronologically or just?
No, you want me to mention a few and we'll talk about
it? Or I can.
Gentleman here, Johnny Winter.
There he is. There he is. He was always really, really nice to me. The way that happened was I used to play with a guitarist named Roy Buchanan, who was a very well-respected but not famous. Oh, look at you. Okay, guitarist, and most famous for turning down the Rolling Stones when they were looking for a guitar player. By the way,
you can say that.
but let me tell you how this happened. That's the whole interesting thing about this business. Scott Cuny is a good friend of mine, and he's also one of the most highly respected guitarists in Broadway classical music. I mean, when the New York Philharmonic needs a banjo or a lute player, Scott Cuny is the guy they call. And so what happened was John Adams, who produced the first PBS special about Roy Buchanan, said, "Listen, Roy's looking for a band for this, for a couple of dates. Do you know anybody?" So he gave them my name. And so John Adams called me. Roy was not carrying a band at that point. And he said, "Okay, great. Can you get a drummer?" And I asked Ray Marchico, who's one of my closest friends and one of my favorite drummers. And
I love Ray. Nina, Ray, if you're watching, sending love your way.
Well, I'm proud to say that I played bass, co-produced, and mixed Nina's Broadway World Best Jazz CD 2013 winning album.
Nina's one of the best. She really is.
And we had a great team there. Don Rebick, who I know is musical director. Sean Hartness. It was, it was a tremendous experience, and one of the first times I ever was really asked to produce. And again, that just happened. I didn't go fishing for it. You know what I mean? They said, "Hey Jeff, what do you think of? Hey Jeff, what do you think of? Hey Jeff, will you listen to?" And then it became.
So that's another musical hat that you put on. Did you enjoy producing? And
Very much.
What exactly producing is under a big umbrella? What exactly did it mean for you personally producing this particular album?
Well, what it meant is that it was everything from arranging ideas to playing ideas to overdubbing ideas. And it was nice that they felt that I had their back and that, our CD was better because of that kind of involvement. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think producing is. A producer is someone who brings out the very, very best in the talent and makes it not necessarily about them. Like Richard Perry, these kind of producers. I learned a lot from a fellow named Harold Kleiner, who was with RCA for many years, and he was with Disney for many years. That's how I met, Denny LaRue, who I do a lot of work with for many, many years. Another mentor and another co-conspirator as far as writing and engineering and mastering and composition and studio work. We coincidentally, he lives in Atlantic Beach, Florida, mm-hmm. and that's about maybe half an hour from me, and we fortunately get to work together a lot. So the tentacles go far and wide. You know what I mean with everything.
I always say that for an artist, let's mention Nina again, for example, being at the forefront. It's her name that sells the album and everything, but it's truly a collaborative process. And what I love the most about this business is the collaborative process.
If you're lucky, it is. And Nina's the kind of person that allowed that.
Exactly.
Nina, like yourself, is a very big picture person and another one of my closest friends. And with that camaraderie comes better musical results because of things like that.
Right. But what I wanted to ask you, and I don't want names because I'm all about celebrating, not denigrating. Has there ever been a situation where you found yourself working with other musicians or even a major name, and again, no names, please, in which you found that you were uncomfortable because it was no longer about the collaborative process?
Well, let me put it this way. Yes. I mean, and frequently, people just want to have that kind of control for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. They know that works for them. It's not the participation of everybody is not indigenous to what the final result they're looking for is. So I would say it happened a lot because that was the paradigm. The paradigm was, it's like, please help us as much as you can and just sit there and play. I mean, and it's run the gamut between all of those things.
And how much freedom do you have when you come into a studio with other musicians? They already have their vision of what they want to do, but are you ever tapped on the shoulder and said, because of your expertise, what you're bringing to the table,
no question about it. And those are the best of the situations. Often that's why you're there. Mm-hmm. They're calling you to bring what you do there. And it's fortunately happened to me with a lot of different kinds of music. Like with Johnny Winter, for instance, whose picture you had up there before.
Go back there. Yeah.
Ta-da! And I mean, he knew I liked jazz, and he knew that I'd worked with a lot of different jazz people. So one day on the bus, he goes, I play him like a Bill Evans cassette that I had and some other stuff. And he says, Jeff, why do you want to play this simple music? You're a jazz musician. And I mean, aren't you bored? And I said, no, you're Johnny Winter. You know what I mean? He is where he is because of him taking pre-existing music and making it his own.
Now, has there ever been a genre of music that you haven't played that you would love to play that's still on the bucket list?
Individual musicians, yes. Certain people I would absolutely love to play with just because of how I feel when I listen to their records. And that's been a lot of the impetus for me wanting to do this in the first place, because it's always been, I don't know about you, but for me, it's always been difficult for me to make that transition from fan to peer to colleague.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, wait a minute, this person that I've been, listening to my entire life is calling me, and to play with them. And it's hard. They don't want to be worshipped, but sometimes it's hard to not do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to drop a name. I just interviewed Connie Francis a few days ago, and who I know you've worked with as well. And she has this phenomenal relationship with her fans. And she told me that many of the people that started out as fans have become true friends of hers. And, I think that there's a fanatic, and that person is always going to make the star uncomfortable. And then there are the people who genuinely respect the people that end up becoming their friends. Who are some of the people that you have aspired to work with? They may be listening tonight. Who you'd like to work with?
Well, before I do that, can I address your first question?
Yes.
Of who the mentors are, and who mentored me a lot. I worked for her for many years, and she's become a good friend. Rita Moreno.
Absolutely.
Tops in my book. I mean, we would have long discussions about a lot of important non-musical things. And I'm pleased to say that I just spoke to her not long ago on her birthday.
Well, she is someone who crossed every genre in the business.
That's exactly right. And when I first time I worked with her I was in Jerry Mulligan's orchestra at the time, and we were backing her up, on a date at Park West in Chicago. Now it's 2 years later, and I was going up to the Concord Hotel in the Catskills, and they would add musicians to their orchestra to play for certain people that when the artist didn't carry those people as part of their entourage. So as a house guy, I worked for Rita in 80, 82, and in 84, they said, "Hey, Jeff, listen, we have an opportunity to add a bass player for these dates in Atlantic City. They don't have one handy." And I said, "Of course." Went down and did a couple of weeks of her at the Sands. And while we were there, they asked me to come aboard full time, which I did for years.
Now, you also share this other story of another great artist from the Concord, and that was Ben Vereen.
Oh my God.
I worship at this man's feet. I just love him so much.
Tremendous guy, tremendous talent. Talk about effusiveness. Man, talk about just being able to do anything. And he's got them in the palm of his hand. There's my hand. Yeah, he's got them in the palm of his hand. And he would do things in that particular club act, like a tribute to Bill Robinson. And it's like, you want to be in the audience, but you got the best seat in the house being on stage, And I actually got to play for him not long ago. He was in Kessler rehab for injuries that he had sustained, and he did a little thank you concert for everybody. And so I got to work with him again. Not that long.
Generous spirit, but you also got to work with one of my idols, and that's Chuck Berry.
Oh my God.
So what was that experience like?
Oh, there were several. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of funny ones. It depends on how far you'd like to go with this, but
I want to go as far as you want to go, as long as we're respectful of them.
Okay. First, okay, then I'll tell you two quick Chuck Berry stories.
Great.
Here's the first rehearsal. We get to Shea's Buffalo Theater, and the rehearsal is, okay, when I put my foot up, you play. When I put my foot down, you stop. See you later. That was the rehearsal. So we went on stage that night and played Chuck Berry songs with, with him. The second was we were playing at a place called Classics 3 in Camp Springs, Maryland. And it was a different band because he never carried a band. He would either use house bands or bands had to be assembled with him. I mean, there's a famous clip that a friend of mine sent me of the house band on a TV show. Was Dave Brubeck was the piano player with Chuck Berry. And so anyway, he tells this joke on stage, and the punchline of the joke is, and he was so full of S that they could bury him in a shoebox. And I started laughing hysterically because I'd never heard this joke before. He turned around to me on mic. He goes, "Oh, come on, man. I told you that one. Don't give me that showbiz BS." I turned as red as this chair.
Oh, God.
So those are my two Chuck Berry stories, but playing with them was a lot of fun. And as a matter of fact, one of the coolest things about, the old tune like Cottage for Sale?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Used to do Cottage for Sale.
With Chuck Berry?
Chuck Berry used to do Cottage for Sale.
Wow.
But he used to do it by himself because the bands that he had probably didn't know Cottage for Sale. So
Did
he used
he do it as written, or did he riff on it?
No, he just did it. He would stand up there with the guitar and just him and, very similar to the way it was, not that different from the way Billy Eckstine recorded it.
But are there recordings of him doing this?
Pardon me?
Are there recordings of him doing this?
There, at the end of Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, the movie, is him doing it in the credits.
Wow. Now, and where did you go to high school?
I went to a couple of different high schools. I went to Riverdale for 4 years, and then my senior year, I went to a school called the Windsor School in Queens.
Now, I asked because you went to school with a young girl named Arlene Jacks.
Oh, my goodness. That's right, Arlene.
Sure. School.
Didn't she go? I don't know if she went to the exact same school I did, but she went to music and art, didn't she?
You were high school classmates. She's watching.
Okay.
She just
Hi, Arlene.
She just
She also knows the previously mentioned Scott Cuny. They were in school together.
Now, the musicians that are currently on the scene today, who do you find that music and art is where you went to school?
Right. Okay.
So, of the musicians,
I didn't go to music and art though, but they did.
I'm sorry.
They went to music and art for sure.
But Arlene said that you were high school classmates.
Okay. Didn't go to music and art, but I did.
Oh, she was in with Scott Cuny.
Correct.
Oh no, that's what she's telling me. So, out of the musicians, out of the musicians that are working today, what do you find that you're listening to, that you're gravitating to? Who are some of the ones that might surprise us that are currently on your radar?
Bill Frisell is always going to be on my radar. Jeff Beck is always going to be on my radar. Ralph Towner, the great guitarist who played with Oregon, is always going to be on my radar. And it's a lot of different instrumentalists. And then there's a lot of people like John Pizzarelli that started out great, and just get better. I got to play with him a few times back in the day. And there's a lot of different kinds of people that I just like.
Now, I want to go back to where we started with, where we are right now. How do you structure your days currently as far as your music is concerned?
Different. I devote a lot of time to the bass. As a matter of fact, specifically, I'm devoting a lot of time to the 8-string bass, which is something that actually got me the job with Roy Buchanan and Johnny Winter, as a matter of fact. Because when we were opening for Johnny Winter with Roy, Johnny said, he needed a bass player after his longtime bass player left. Excuse me. And they said, well, who should we get? And Johnny said, well, get that guy to play with Roy Buchanan. Mm. I brought the thing along. I mean, he had met me before and was really intrigued by the sound of the instrument. And you know what? Because of the work situation being what it is, and you creating your own work, I'm sort of in the same boat because freelance doesn't exist anymore, really, to me. And a lot of people that I've spoken to myself included, feel that, maybe gigs and sideman work were a long time detour away from why you started playing in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so I'm putting a lot of time into that particular end of the craft.
Now, with everything that's going on right now, what do you think are some of the things that will continue to resonate throughout the music industry moving forward? And what things are happening now do you think may hurt the music industry?
Can you be more specific? Are we talking about like music for Broadway shows?
Yeah, a lot of people are streaming things. Some people are streaming their entire shows that they used to book on the road. This is not going to last forever, everyone. So don't give away all the goods now. But
right. And a lot of people feel that way. Some people are very ambivalent about other artists doing that or doing that themselves, But but then again, there's people that need to feed their families. How monetizing is a whole other game from where it used to be.
I think. We started out with this clip of you playing the bass, and there were all these different basses behind you.
Right.
Are they all different? Do they each have a different sound?
Yes, they are. Okay. They're all string configuration. They're all different. Well, I've got an 8-string close by if you want to see one.
Yeah, I would love that, please.
Here it is, a customized Hondo 8-string bass by Roger Sadowsky, and he actually made it sound very much. He made it sound like a one-of-a-kind thing. And when you're talking about like being hired and the questions you were asking before about do people want to pigeonhole you, do people want you to do interactive and non-interactive, I'm sort of looking at this thing as me sort of being more of an artist than a for hire guy doing this. So it's kind of like there's certain musicians that are very, very distinctive and they're very important to other people's records. One of the first people I think of is a fellow like David Lindley, whose odd choices of instruments have made him invaluable to people like Jackson Browne, and the sound of what he does out of his own volition make those records sound the way they do.
Now, when you started,
another bassist, that played with Paul Young, Don Henley, very distinctive bass sound. Jaco Pastorius, another very signature bass sound. So in addition to his Weather Report days, he was with Ian Hunter. He was with Joni Mitchell. They all considered his particular voice very valuable to their musical outcome.
Now, without getting, do you like being on the road? Do you enjoy being on the road, or do you like being in one place for a long period of time? I know that you've also worked on Broadway.
I have.
On a few shows. How did that work? I know that with some orchestras, they will sub people in for the show, but did you have a long-term contract when you were on Broadway?
I had both. I started out as a sub, and then the contractors would call me for some of the things that came up. So Scott Cuny, again, schoolmate, hired me for Big River on Broadway. And the same, and then a contractor named Mel Rodman, who's no longer with us, hired me for Starlight Express. And a fellow named Bill Meade hired me for, here's one out of your passing, probably don't talk about too much, the Gershwin's Fascinating Rhythm.
When was that?
97. No, 99. I'm sorry. 99. And I also was hired to do Lamb Chop on Broadway with Sherry Lewis.
Sherry Lewis.
If you remember that.
It was yesterday, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, you knew that.
As a matter of fact, the percussionist on that particular job was the dear departed Ian Finkel, who we just lost not long ago. Yeah. So there's like 0 degrees of separation these days.
So again, do you prefer being in one space for a long time, or do you like travel?
No, it's musically dependent to me, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. It's very much musically dependent, and of course the accommodations. I'd much rather be on a tour bus in a single room than being in a van and sharing a room with somebody. But I've done both.
And have you done cruise ships as well?
I did them as a sideman. I was on the Rotterdam twice.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, one of my favorite Rotterdam stories was that it was the Christmas New Year's cruise, 1976 to 77, and the band leader thought it would be a great idea to take a break at 10 minutes to midnight. So the band is scurrying, the cruise director comes running over. But as a matter of fact, my really close friend Tom Lamarck ended up being the musical director.
Tom Lamarck.
Our friend Tom Lamarck, as a matter of fact, who I believe is listening. He was musical director for the World Cruise Show Band for years.
Now, as long as you've been in the business, what are some of the things that you've seen, changes that you've seen in the business that you absolutely love? And what are some of the things that you have resisted the most as far as change is concerned?
God, are we talking about business or music?
Either or.
God, that's a really good question. I've been trying to go with the flow as much as I can, because what is.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets back to what I was sort of intimating before. If you have your own vision of something, it gives you more autonomy to do what you have to do instead of worrying. I was never one of those musicians that would be sitting in a Broadway pit looking at Variety to see what the grosses were that week. You know what I mean? Sorry?
Or where their next gig would be.
Right. And, I knew there would be a next gig, and at some point there's not going to be a next gig. But I'm also finding the balance of what's going on with specifically the now and pandemic and COVID and disenfranchisement. It just seems that people are doing extremely good work creating it themselves.
Absolutely.
And when the dust clears, it's going to be, I love when people keep talking about, well, when it goes back to the way it was, it's like, well, I don't think the big broadcast of 1938 is going to be opening anywhere anytime soon.
No.
So it's a whole new thing. But to me, it's also exacerbating disenfranchising and the changing of the guard. People my age are, we're starting to be phased out. Younger conductors were coming in and calling musicians they wanted to work with. But this is sort of a jolt to the same thing. So the fact that so many people are taking it into their own hands now is a good thing, I think.
Well, I think of this time as a pause. I think it's a time for us all to take a collective deep breath and pause and think about those things that matter to us, those things that we had that we no longer have, and what we truly do desire in our lives. How do you feel? And we're now, in just a few weeks, we'll be going into year 2 of living with this. How do you think that this has really shaped who you are today?
One of the things that has really shaped who I am today is being a husband, a stepdad, and now a grandfather. And that has made the reasons for playing are completely different now, mm-hmm. and have been.
And how often do you see your grandkids?
They live, fortunately, in the same development as us here in Florida, and I see them several times a week.
So, you're very lucky there. Well, and what's ahead for you? I know it's hard to say with where we are with everything, but what are you currently working on that we can look forward to?
I'm producing a bunch of different projects right now that have not come to the light of day that I'm not really able to disclose at this point. But when they do, you'll be the first to know.
Great.
And, just trying to get better at what I do and be a better person and just be better at everything. That's really what everything is pointing towards. Right now, it's not like I've got something coming out in 2 weeks, please buy it. It's not that. Hopefully because there's that famous old line from the old TV show, The Mothers-in-Law.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a line in there, you'll jinx it if you blab. And then they started singing, you'll jinx it if you blab, you'll jinx it if you blab, so I kind of am in that position with them,
Well, Carol Channing once said to me, she said, there are those that talk about what they're going to do, and then there are those that do. And you, of course, are in the second category. Well, I can't believe this, Jeff, but we are at the end of our show.
Oh, my goodness.
I hope it was fun for you.
Oh, I had a great time. And again, it was a real privilege being invited and being amongst, your very elite group of folks here.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I hope you had a great time. If you did have a great time, and if you haven't done so already, please go to my guest book, richardskipper.com. Sign the guest book with your thoughts about the show. That helps to boost me in other markets. I also want to let everyone know I'm taking tomorrow off. It is a holiday, and I'm taking a break. But on Tuesday, I will be back with Sally Wilford, who, have you worked with her?
No, not yet.
Oh, my God. Phenomenal talent. But I always end the show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list. Go to the 8th name that pops up and reach out to that person and let them know what they mean to you. Not with an email or a text or a private message or a post on Facebook, but a phone call. Reach out. As my dear friend David Friedman always says.
I love David Friedman. God, I got to know Joseph with him in '83. I used to sub there all the time. What a brilliant, sweet guy.
He's the best. And he says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. You never know what someone else is going through. So before we end the show, I want to give you the final word. Anything that you want to say to expound upon anything that we talked about tonight, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish that we had, or just any message that you want to put out to everyone who's watching or listening right now. And again, Jeff, thank you. You're the tops.
Thank you. And the best message all I want to do is thank you for this opportunity. I'm really glad I'm here. And stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. And check out the website. There's a lot more there. Thank you. Have a good night.
You do the same.
Thank you.